So Xi Jinping is the political leader of China. Among all the positions he's holding, he's probably holding dozens of positions right now, but there are three that are the most important. First, he's the president of China. This means that he's the head of the state. He gets to meet with other heads of state, for example, Queen Elizabeth or the president of the United States. But in China, this is a symbolic position, which doesn't come with a lot of power. Second, he's the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party. This means that he's the boss of the party. This is more powerful than, for example, his counterpart in the US, which, for example, is the chair of the Republican National Committee, which doesn't have a lot of power. But in China, if you are the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party, you get to make decisions not only for the party, but also for the whole country. The third position, which is the most powerful among all, is the chairman of the Central Military Affairs Commission. This means that he's the commander-in-chief in China, who is in charge of China's military. In addition to these formal positions, he's also a princeling, which means that he's the son of one of the founding fathers of the People's Republic of China. His father, Xi Jinping, was a colleague of Mao Zedong's and also a high-ranking official in the 1950s, 1960s. So Xi Jinping has this formal power coming from his formal positions, but also he has this charisma, his legacy from his father, who was one of the founders. So a popular view is that Xi is a dictator who moves his fingers and things get done in China, but that's actually not true. I'm going to make a bold argument here that it's actually not as powerful as we think he is. We often associate power with formal positions, but that has not been the case in Chinese politics. Deng Xiaoping, for example, who was the leader of China in the 1980s, didn't hold the same positions that Xi Jinping is holding. For example, Deng was never the president of China. Deng was never the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party. So you cannot really measure how much power a person has by looking at his formal positions. We political scientists often consider power to have three phases. We have three phases of power. The first is decision-making power. So who gets to make decisions? For example, how much money we should allocate to infrastructure rather than education, things like that. The second phase of power is so-called agenda setting power. That is, we get to decide what decisions get to made. For example, during a meeting, what are the items on the agenda that we can make decisions on? This is the second phase of power. If you can make the agenda, you have a lot of power. But then the really important phase of power, which is the third phase of power, is about thought control. That is, you can influence how people think. And then if you have this phase of power, you have the third phase of power, you can influence how people think. You don't even need the first two phases of power. You don't need to make decisions. You don't need to set the agenda. You can just simply influence how people think, right? So that's the most important phase of power we political scientists care about. So in a sense, say for example, a lot of people compare Mao Zedong and Xi Jinping and think that Xi is more powerful than Mao Zedong. But I would make the counter argument that Mao actually has the third phase of power, that during the Cultural Revolution, during the whole Mao era, I would say Mao could really influence how Chinese people think. During the Cultural Revolution, people followed him, voluntarily, to become Red Guards, for example. And then and people were voluntarily doing this, not because of fear. It's actually because they believed in Mao. They believe in Maoism. They believe that Mao is a good leader who can lead China to a better future. But I would say that Xi Jinping doesn't have that power, right? I think most of the times in contemporary China, Xi makes people comply by creating fear. It's not that people are following him voluntarily. It's actually people following him because people worry about the risks of not following him, right? And then, say, for example, during his anti-corruption campaign, he arrested a lot of high-ranking officials, which created this fear among all the bureaucrats in the whole political system. And then people, changed their behavior because of fear created during the anti-corruption campaign, not because people voluntarily follow what Xi Jinping tells them to do. It might have reduced corruption in the Chinese government, but we don't really know whether it will last once the fear is gone. And then one limitation of using fear is that you never know whether people are truly loyal to you, right? They're now loyal to you on the surface. Xi appears to have no political opponents, at least publicly, but the officials all appear to be loyal and compliant. But they might be hiding their true feelings, right? So I think it's very important to understand it's not only about what you look on the surface, how powerful you are, whether you can make decisions. It's also about whether you can shape how people think. I don't think there will be a big event that lead to the collapse of the Chinese Communist Party. I don't think that will happen in the near future. But I think that in the next, let's say 5 or 10 years, if Xi Jinping is still in power, let's say in the next 5 or 10 years, one sign that his power is declining is we see more policy changes or policy shifts within a very short period of time, right? We in the past several years that he has been trying to push for certain policies, but we are maybe in the next 5 or 10 years we are likely to change his policies, where there's some public discussions that question the policies that he made in the past 10 years. So I think those are probably the signs that his power is declining. Also a sign that there are disagreements within the party, but that's still very unlikely, I think, because he has accumulated so much power within the Chinese Communist Party, and then like I said, everybody is quiet because there's this fear. One difference between Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un is that Kim Jong-un's grandfather, Kim Il-sung, created the Workers' Party of Korea. This is the ruling party in North Korea right now. So which means that the legitimacy of the Kim family predated the legitimacy of the ruling party in Korea. And then you can imagine that, for example, if the Kim family is gone, North Korea might collapse, because the whole legitimacy of the regime really depends on the legitimacy of the Kim family. But this is not the case for Xi Jinping or the Chinese Communist Party. Xi's family, even though his father was one of the founding fathers of the People's Republic of China, but he didn't create the party like Kim Il-sung did. So therefore, the power of the Xi family, or the power of Xi Jinping himself, really comes from the party. The party has the legitimacy. People support the party, and then they support whoever controls the party. So therefore, if you say, for example, if Xi Jinping is gone, or the Xi family is gone, I would imagine that the Chinese Communist Party will still be there, in China, ruling China, because the legitimacy of the party is still elected Xi Jinping himself. And then when it comes to Putin, it's very interesting that both are in the popular view, both are dictators who have a lot of power. But actually, if you look at what they did, they both follow the rules, right? In Putin's case, he had to step down because the constitution had term limits. So he had to step down to become the prime minister, and then he comes back to become the president. For Xi Jinping, because the constitution has term limits for the presidency, he had to change the constitution. Although it's this is a manifestation of power, but then he had to follow the rules. He had to change the constitution so that he can follow the rules. When he abolished term limits, now he can forever. Some of them actually follow the rules. So that's very interesting, which is very counterintuitive when we think about them as powerful dictators. He can rule for life, but it doesn't mean that he will. If I were Xi Jinping, I would never become Xi Jinping. But if I were the top leader in China, and then there's no term limits, the best way for me and for my legacies to continue is actually when I'm healthy, when I'm relatively younger. I would choose someone that I trust completely, and then make that person my heir apparent, and then make sure that he or she, I hope it's a she, but it's not very likely in Chinese politics, my parent will carry my legacies, right? So I think that would be the best scenario for Xi Jinping. So which means that, if he really cares about his legacies, he will step down earlier, and then choose his heir apparent to make sure that the heir apparent will continue his policies.